I never imagined the moment would come when my world would quiet down, and then shatter with just a few words. I met a man at a work event, and I fell for him at first sight. She said it like it was nothing, a casual confession, soft and almost shy. But for me, the words hit like ice. My chest tightened, my hands went numb, and for a long moment, the room around me felt impossibly silent. I wanted to scream, to beg her to stay, to make her see that what we had meant everything. But I didn't. I only sat there listening, heart slowly fracturing. We had been married for 3 years. Not rich, not fancy, just ordinary. I worked hard every day, earning just enough to keep our little life going. My clothes were simple, my apartment modest. Yet, I loved her with everything I had. Every laugh, every gentle touch, every quiet morning we shared over coffee and sunlight, filtering through our small kitchen window. And now she was telling me she had fallen for someone else, someone whose world I could never reach. Someone whose life glimmered with wealth and ease, while mine barely existed in comparison. I remembered the soft tilt of her head as she spoke, the faint smile she gave me, the way her eyes avoided mine. It was almost tender, almost apologetic, and yet it pierced me deeper than anything I had ever felt. I whispered, barely audible, I guess I'm not enough. Her words hung in the air, a quiet accusation, or maybe just truth. I don't know. All I knew was the sting of being invisible in the eyes of someone I had given everything to. But in that silence, in that ache, a strange feeling began to grow, a quiet, patient resolve. Not loud revenge, not fury, just a stillness, a watching, a knowing that life has a way of teaching lessons. And sometimes the deepest lessons come wrapped in heartbreak. Because love, I was learning, is not always about who stays. Sometimes it's about who sees. And maybe, just maybe, the heart sees more than the eyes ever could. I grew up in a small town, the kind where everyone knows everyone else, and money is always tight. My father worked 2 jobs. My mother stitched clothes for neighbors, and even with all their effort, there was rarely enough. But love. Love was never scarce. It was in the way my parents shared quiet smiles over dinner, in the small gestures that said, "We have each other, and that's enough." I carried that love with me into adulthood, believing that it was more important than anything else in life. When I met her Alina, that belief became my anchor. Alina, she was the kind of woman people notice without meaning to. Tall, graceful, with a laugh that lingered like a soft melody. I first saw her at a local cafe, and something about the sunlight catching her hair made me feel like I had glimpsed a kind of magic. I didn't know then that she would one day become my wife. Her world was different from mine. She worked for a prestigious firm, surrounded by people with expensive tastes, polished shoes, and lives far removed from mine. I had my modest accounting job, my small apartment, my second-hand bicycle. I remember worrying that my life was too plain, too simple, too small for someone like her. But she looked at me like I mattered. She laughed at my awkward jokes, asked about my day, and reached for my hand in quiet, unspoken moments. Her father, Mr. Lancaster, was a man whose name alone whispered wealth and power. A billionaire who moved through life with a carefully controlled calm, whose mansion had wings that made my apartment look like a tiny closet. He tolerated me politely enough during the engagement, though I could see the faint shadow of disapproval whenever he noticed my worn shoes or humble manners. But Alina, she didn't care. She told me once late at night, when the city lights spilled softly into our room, "I love you, not your money, not your life." I held on to those words like a lifeline. For a time, I believed that love could bridge any gap between worlds. Our first year of marriage was quiet, simple, and full of small joys. We cooked together, laughing over burnt meals. We watched movies curled on our tiny couch. I remember the smell of her perfume mixing with the aroma of my carefully prepared dinners. I remember the gentle brush of her hair against my arm during late-night walks, the way her fingers intertwined with mine. In those moments, I believed nothing else mattered. But life outside our little world began to press against us. Invitations to work events, parties, and galas became more frequent. She spoke of colleagues, CEOs, and opportunities that made my head spin. I tried to be proud of her, to cheer her on, but slowly I began to notice a change. Her eyes often held admiration for a world I could never touch, a world that made my small existence feel invisible, and yet I tried to believe in us. I clung to the warmth of her touch, the quiet reassurance in her voice, the way she once told me she loved me for who I was. I wanted to believe that love was enough to keep our hearts connected, no matter how different our worlds were. But the seed of tension had been planted quietly, almost imperceptibly. It grew in silences and fleeting glances, in the way she lingered over her phone, in the way her laughter sometimes felt distant, and I, foolishly, thought I could ignore it, think it would pass. Little did I know, that tension was only the beginning. It started with small things, tiny, almost invisible, but they accumulated like raindrops on a window until the glass could barely hold them. She began to sigh more often, not with exhaustion, but with something heavier, something I couldn't name at first. The laughter we once shared over burnt dinners became quieter, less frequent. She would glance at her phone, mid-conversation, smile faintly at messages I couldn't see, then return her eyes to me as if nothing had happened. I tried not to notice, tried to tell myself it was just work stress, just the pressures of her growing career. But deep down, I felt it. The distance. One evening, she came home from a work event, her dress soft silk that caught the dim light of our apartment, her perfume stronger than usual. I asked her about the event, expecting the usual stories of colleagues, presentations, and laughter. She paused. Her eyes were somewhere far away. "I met someone tonight," she said quietly. My stomach sank as though it had turned to lead. He's different. Successful, confident. Everything I admire. I laughed nervously, my voice hollow. "Sounds like a good connection," I said, though my throat felt dry, my hands trembling slightly. I forced a smile, the one I used when I didn't want anyone to see my pain. She looked at me, eyes glistening. "It's nothing. I can't explain it." Her words trailed off. Days passed. I tried to focus on work, on small chores, on anything that could fill the growing emptiness inside me. But the silence between us was deafening. I noticed the subtle way she dressed more elegantly for events, the way she lingered on phone calls, the quiet smile when she spoke to certain colleagues. One night, I asked cautiously, almost whispering, "Do you still love me?" Her gaze fell to the floor. "I do," she said softly. "I care about you." But she didn't finish. That unspoken but became a wound I carried with me every day. I tried to remind myself of our love. I clung to memories of our first year, the quiet mornings, the laughter over cheap meals, the small touches that felt like home. I believed that love could survive anything, even this creeping distance. But slowly, painfully, I realized we were no longer speaking the same language. She spoke of ambition, of luxury, of possibilities I could never reach. I spoke of dreams that fit within our modest life. And with each conversation, each silent dinner, the gulf between us grew wider. Then came the confession I had feared but somehow knew was coming. We were on our tiny balcony one evening, the city lights flickering like distant stars. I reached for her hand, hoping to bridge the gap with a familiar touch. "I met a man at a work event," she whispered, barely audible, "and I fell for him at first sight." Time seemed to stop. The air thickened. My heart pounded in my ears. I wanted to cry, to scream, to shake her awake from whatever spell had taken her heart. But I couldn't. I only watched, helpless, as the woman I loved spoke words that cut deeper than any blade. Her voice trembled slightly. "I didn't plan this. I didn't want it to happen. But he has everything. Everything I ever dreamed of." I nodded slowly, swallowing the lump in my throat. I see," I whispered. The silence that followed was heavy, full of unspoken sorrow. I wanted to ask why, to beg her to stay, but I knew the answer before the question even left my lips. Love, no matter how deep, sometimes loses to desire for comfort, wealth, and status. And I was not enough. The days that followed were unbearable. Every glance, every word, every laugh from her that wasn't for me was a quiet knife. I noticed the way she now avoided our small apartment when she could, the way her excitement seemed reserved for a world I could never enter. I wanted to leave, to run, to escape the constant reminder that my love was not enough. And yet, a strange calm settled in me, not acceptance, not relief, but a quiet resolve. I began to watch, to learn, to understand the choices she was making, because sometimes the heart sees what the eyes cannot. Sometimes patience and silence speak louder than confrontation. I started paying attention to the details, the way she laughed at messages I could not read, the subtle changes in her routine, the hidden invitations she accepted without telling me. And slowly, I began to piece together a picture I had feared, but which was now undeniable. My wife, the woman I had given everything to, was being drawn toward someone else, a man whose wealth, status, and charm were far beyond anything I could offer. But even as the betrayal settled over me like a quiet storm, I realized something else. There was power in stillness, power in watching, power in knowing that sometimes the world's loudest lessons are taught not with anger or shouting, but with patience, observation, and the quiet understanding that life has its way of balancing hearts and choices. The truth has a way of arriving quietly, without warning, like the sudden hush before a storm. I had been living in a haze of heartbreak, watching the woman I loved drift further away, and yet I could sense that something was about to change, something she had no idea I had seen all along. It began with her father, Mr. Lancaster, a man who had always regarded me with polite tolerance, whose mansion and lifestyle seemed untouchable, whose every gesture radiated control and power. I never understood fully what went on behind his doors until the night I discovered it. I had been working late on some paperwork, in the quiet apartment that now felt emptier than ever. The city outside glittered with lights, mocking me silently. And then, a message appeared on her phone, left carelessly on the table. A text from her new interest, her first work event confession, made flesh in digital form. It mentioned arrangements, meetings, gifts, opportunities, and a name I recognized. Her father's curiosity and dread gripped me. I followed the trail carefully, quietly. A series of documents, messages, and whispered conversations I overheard revealed something I never expected. Her father had been watching, testing, subtly manipulating the path she was taking. He had orchestrated introductions, nudged conversations, and even guided her toward that man, the one she claimed she fell for at first sight. The realization hit me like ice water. It wasn't just her choice. It was a carefully constructed plan, a trap of sorts, orchestrated by someone with money and influence who saw my humble life as insufficient. I sat in the dark, absorbing every word, every detail. The betrayal I felt for her love now expanded into a deeper, quieter understanding. She was not entirely free, not entirely herself in this. She was being led, guided by someone whose world she had always dreamed of entering. And yet, she still had a choice. The night I confronted her, I did not shout. I did not cry. I simply sat across from her at the small kitchen table, the dim light from the fridge casting soft shadows across her face. "I know," I said quietly. She froze, eyes wide. "Know what?" she whispered, voice trembling, unsure. "I know about the arrangements, about your meetings, your plans, and your father's involvement," I said softly. My words were calm, even gentle, though inside, a storm raged. "I know he guided you toward him. I know he tested me." She didn't speak. She couldn't. I could see her mind racing, guilt and fear reflected in her eyes. "I understand now," I continued. "I understand why you said those words, why you felt drawn to him. But I also understand that your heart is still capable of choice, and right now, it's up to you what to do with it." The silence was deafening. I didn't press. I didn't plead. I let her sit with the weight of my words, with the knowledge that the carefully constructed path she had been walking was visible, laid bare in front of her. That night, she cried, quietly, softly, against the counter, alone in the kitchen that had once been our sanctuary. And I realized something essential. Sometimes revelation doesn't come with violence or anger. It comes quietly, slowly, leaving the choices in the hands of those who must live with them. In that moment, I felt a shift, not a victory, not a triumph, but a quiet power, the kind that does not shout or demand, the kind that comes from knowing the truth, seeing the lies, and holding yourself steady even when the world seems to crumble around you. I left her there, weeping softly, and walked to the window. The city lights, reflected in the glass, distant and indifferent. I understood then that her choices were hers, influenced or not, but my strength lay in my stillness, in my patience, in the way I held my dignity and my heart intact even in the face of betrayal. It was a turning point, not just for her, not just for us, but for me. I realized that life is not about the loudest revenge or the harshest words. It's about understanding, observing, and letting the truth reveal itself in its own time. And sometimes, the quietest responses are the ones that echo the longest. After that night, the world felt quieter, sharper, and strangely clearer. I no longer saw her with the same warmth, but I also no longer felt the same helplessness. The storm had passed, leaving behind a stillness I could finally inhabit. She avoided my gaze at first, the air between us thick with unspoken truths, but I didn't chase her. I didn't beg or plead. I had learned something essential. Power isn't in shouts or confrontations. It's in presence, in composure, in holding yourself intact while others falter. I focused on myself, not in bitterness, not in revenge that roared, but in quiet reclamation of dignity. I worked on my life, my ambitions, small steps that slowly reminded me I could exist fully, even in a world where love and money had collided in ways I couldn't control. She noticed, of course. Alina couldn't help but see the calm in my eyes, the subtle strength in my actions. I smiled politely when she tried to discuss her feelings or her regrets. I listened without arguing. I nodded without pleading. The power of silence, so often underestimated, was now mine. Her father, the architect of this chain of events, realized too. I could see the respect in his eyes grow slowly, quietly. Perhaps he recognized that I had endured, that I had witnessed, that I had chosen integrity over anger. There was a lesson in my stillness he could not ignore. True strength does not require riches, nor intimidation, nor manipulation. It comes from within. Alina eventually spoke again. Her words were softer this time, tinged with guilt, admiration, and something I no longer needed to name. I didn't mean to hurt you, she said, voice trembling. I know, I replied gently. I didn't need more. I understood her choices, her weaknesses, her influences. I understood human hearts. They are fragile, easily swayed, but also capable of growth, reflection, and honesty. We never went back to how things were. That chapter had closed quietly, like a door left ajar, but never reopened. She moved toward the world she had chosen, and I moved toward the world I could build for myself. I wasn't bitter. I wasn't angry. I was calm, free, even, in a way I hadn't realized I could be. Life continued in quiet rhythms. I found solace in simple things: morning coffee, the faint smell of rain on asphalt, the soft creak of the apartment floorboards. I found joy in work, in friends, in moments that required nothing but presence. And slowly, the ache of betrayal softened into clarity, understanding, and even a strange gratitude. Because in all of it, the heartbreak, the distance, the revelation, I had discovered something no wealth could buy: self-respect, patience, and the quiet confidence that comes from knowing your worth is not measured by others' admiration, nor by their money. And in that stillness, I realized a truth that comforted me more than any revenge ever could. Some lessons in love are meant not to punish, but to illuminate, to show you who you are, even when the world tries to tell you who you should be. Years have passed since that night, the night she confessed. The night I realized that love alone sometimes isn't enough to hold two hearts together. And yet, the memories linger, soft and bittersweet, like the echo of a melody long after the music has stopped. I often think of her now not with anger, not with longing, but with understanding. I see her in moments of quiet reflection, in the occasional message or shared memory. And I realize something profound. The heart can choose, but the soul endures. Mine endured. I've built a life since then, one that isn't flashy, isn't rich in gold or diamonds, but is rich in dignity, honesty, and small joys that wealth could never buy. I wake up to mornings bathed in soft sunlight, the smell of coffee, the quiet hum of the city, and I feel peace. Her world moved in a different rhythm, one of luxury and opportunity, of power and influence. And that's fine. Life is not a contest. It is a lesson, unfolding one heartbeat at a time. And the lesson I learned, painful as it was, is one I carry with gratitude. I learned that love cannot be forced, cannot be demanded, and cannot survive when admiration is conditional. I learned that betrayal often wears the mask of honesty, and that wealth, while seductive, cannot measure the true value of a heart. And most importantly, I learned about myself that strength is quiet, patience is powerful, and dignity is something no one can take from you unless you give it away. Sometimes, late at night, I walk past the places we once shared our small cafe. The park bench where we first held hands, the tiny apartment that once felt like a palace. And I smile softly, not with sadness, but with understanding. Every choice, every heartbreak, every revelation led me here, to a place of calm, clarity, and self-respect. If she ever looks back, I hope she sees what I now know, that love is not about riches or power. It is about seeing, truly seeing, the value of someone's heart.